So after all has been said and done, Samurai Jack has obtained proper closure with its 5th season. And like any of the other 4 seasons, it had some really great things to offer. Unfortunately, it had some dumb things too. It was an amazing season, but not necessarily perfect, and we're going to look over why. So to put it simply, this is the top 5 good and bad things about Samurai Jack Season 5. We're gonna be taking turns starting with the good stuff and then moving on to the bad to keep the video from getting repetitive. I believe it'll keep things more interesting. Good thing number 5, the Scotsman's last stand. What people always loved about the Scotsman was his hot-headed attitude, and it certainly shines here, along with a pretty good sense of humor. Scotty leads an army of rebels to attack Aku's fortress along with his legion of daughters, and it ends about as well as you'd expect it to. But not before Scotty gives Aku one last fuck you. His insults are hilarious as always, and I really like the new look that he gives himself. Even the reveal of it is pretty cool, with it focusing on his Gatling gun leg before revealing his radar eye and him sitting in a wheelchair. It shows that his body has given in to old age and he's relying on prosthetics to keep himself alive. He's also shown to be a protective father, acting as a distraction to keep Aku occupied so that his daughters can escape, providing him with a really reliable sense of honor. Even his death quickly turns into one of the coolest things ever as he comes back as a ghost with the help of his cultic magic, restoring his daughter's spirits and keeping them motivated to continue the fight. If I could describe this scene in a short statement, it would be like a visit to the doctor. The Scotsman's death was the flu shot, and seeing him come back was the lollipop. You'll really find yourself shocked and laughing at the same time. It's funny, badass, uplifting, and an awesome moment with the fandom's favorite hot-headed Scottish man. Bad thing number 5, Scaramouche's presence in the story. Now when I say that, I don't mean that Scaramouche is a bad character. He was a humorous assassin with an interesting fighting style, and he provided Jack with a meaningful challenge so the audience can see how he fights without his sword. The problem though is that the second half of the season makes the mistake of bringing him back when they clearly didn't know what to do with him. This resulted in episode 6 having pacing issues, and it's also very annoying that Gendy and his staff thought it was more important to give him more screen time for the sake of some meaningless jokes, instead of focusing on the main theme of the episode, which was Ashi seeing what effect Jack was having on the world. Instead of the Spartans, we get a potentially decapitated dog. Instead of the jump good monkeys, we get Scaramouche being thrown overboard after a failed phone call with Aku. Instead of the colony of dogs, we get...
Whoa, what a freak! Looked like a talking penis.
I would have tolerated this more if Scaramouche's presence actually meant something in the end. But instead he gets killed off in a snap by Aku for not knowing that Jack got his sword back, which I predicted from a mile away. The story treats Scaramouche like he's an important factor in the plot, but then kills him off abruptly because they thought it would be funny. Even the motivation for bringing him back was completely pointless. He was brought back just so he could tell Aku about the lost sword, which could have easily been done by any other means. Like if Aku even bothered to use his magic mirror to spy on him like he was constantly doing in the first 4 seasons. Killing him off also proved that they really didn't know what to do with him beyond just filling up the runtime with pointless comedy. Maybe SpongeBob just really needed a paycheck because last I checked his show hasn't been doing very well. Good thing number 4, the duality themes in episode 7. While Jack is in a meditative state in search of his lost sword, Ashi must defend him from an army of orcs led by her mother. What I really love about the second half of episode 7 is how it brilliantly manages to juggle between the two themes that contrast each other so deeply. Jack's half is much more relaxed and beautiful. Everything about it, from the artistic vision of him traveling through the astral planes to the satisfying attention to detail of the tea ceremony. The segment has a wide range of colors that mesh together fantastically, and the music is like something that you would hear while delving into an alternative state of mind. It doesn't just sound poetic, it feels poetic. It's also some pretty good insight into Jack's damaged psyche and what he must do in order to fix it. The tea making is a method of him relaxing his mind, retaining his focus, and taking control of his spirit, which allows him to finally defeat that inner Jack that's been bothering him for so long. It all leads up to a glorious reveal of the 3 gods giving Jack his sword back as well as his old look. Ashi's half is certainly more action-packed and intense. Some say that it's ridiculous that she's able to beat a whole army by herself, but it's important to know that she's been trained to be on Jack's level, and Jack was able to single-handedly defeat an army of robots in the show's premiere. It's paced well and it's presented very nicely, focusing on the action rather than any bloody or gory features. It also fulfills her story arc by getting proper closure with her mother, or at least as much as closure can mean when you kill her in a fight to the death. It highlights the issue concerning her sister, showing that Ashi is at peace with what happened to them and that it wasn't Jack's fault. And she never really thought of them as anything but assets in her former mission to kill Jack anyway. The timing of the transitions between the two segments is also perfect, giving the two enough time to properly set the mood while also creating a humorous shift in tone. I always find myself more interested in the second half of episode 7 than the first half for how excellently laid out this is. Bad thing number 4, only 10 episodes. The main concern over making the season only 10 episodes long as opposed to 13 meant that if Gendy wasn't careful, the last season would run into a lot of pacing issues. Particularly, there isn't much that I can say about this one except that the season really should have had those other 3 episodes. And considering what happens later on, I would just be repeating myself. It's also made worse by the knowledge that this wasn't the result of a production choice or a studio's influence. Gendy himself literally stated that he wanted just 10 episodes. You'd think those 3 extra episodes would have done better things for the story, such as giving the Scotsman more screen time, or to better build up the climax, or making the finale longer than it was. It's something that would have really benefited the series as a whole, and I honestly will never get why Gendy preferred this decision. Good thing number 3, the choice. In episode 3, Jack's spirit is pushed to the edge with a knife lodged in his rib, his loss of a lot of blood, and that inner side of him still bothering him over just letting himself die. But with the help of a mysterious wolf, Jack is able to patch himself up, and he remembers one of his darker childhood memories. Afterwards, he has a sitting down with his father in which he tells his son about how we are all images of the choices that we make. Jack comes to realize that his survival is his top priority, and he must do whatever it takes to defend himself from these mysterious assassins. There's a number of things that make this one of the most iconic moments of the season, mainly how it provides Jack with a sense of honor as it justifies his decision to resort to killing in order to survive. I actually quite like how Jack is able to realize the reality of the situation instead of giving into that no-killing moral high ground that unfortunately happens more often than it should. He comes to understand that he should not have to feel guilty over killing these humans if they choose to hunt him in Aku's name. He knows that holding back and giving them a chance to kill him would be a victory for Aku, which he simply cannot allow. It also gives us some nice insight on his relationship with his father as a kid, and how he came to learn such an important life lesson. It shows how he takes time to think about what his father told him that day, which gives the advice much more meaning. And even after Jack chooses to take the required steps to defend himself, he gives the daughters another chance. A chance to stop what they're doing and think about what path that they're leading themselves on. But they insist on fighting him, and Jack proceeds to engage them in combat. The way the scene is laid out presents Jack with a good conscience, giving the sisters a chance to reconsider because his desire is not to kill, but to survive. It also shows that this is a result of the sisters' actions and not just Jack's, meaning that they will suffer the consequences. When I say the choice, I don't mean the entire episode as some people have dubbed it. I'm specifically referring to this particular element of the episode as it shines out above everything else that occurs. It's definitely the best in the episode and one of the best in the whole season. Bad thing number 3, the pacing of the finale. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie when I say this one speaks for itself. While the finale does have good writing that's worth noting beyond just copy-pasting what everyone else is doing, there's no denying that this last episode is badly rushed to the point where we don't get any proper closure with any of Jack's allies, or even a reasonable setup for the climax. There is no way anyone can convince me that they all managed to travel halfway around the world in just 90 seconds. Aside from that, it ends up making the stuff following Aku's death feel really tagged on. For one thing, how the hell did Jack's parents age backwards? I actually agree with many people that the finale should have been a two-parter so that everything would have fit together much better. A more expansive final battle between Aku's forces and Jack's allies, Jack having proper closure with his friends and comrades, Jack having a meaningful emotional reunion with his family, people, and homeland while properly mourning the loss of his girlfriend, even the segue into Ashi learning how to use Aku's powers, including the time travel, which would have of made it feel like less of an ass pool. Maybe the gods would also cut Jack some slack and bring Ashi back to life, but I don't really believe that, as a bittersweet ending still feels more poetic and synchronizes much better with the series' themes. Speaking of which, good thing number 2, the final scene. I went on for a long while about what is so fantastic about this ending scene from the last episode, and it has enough meaningful symbolism to give the episode more meaning, which in turn makes up greatly for the episode's logical faults. In short, it manages to capture a lot of the show's themes in a single go with no dialogue, and any Samurai Jack scene that gets something meaningful across without relying on dialogue is always good writing. In the time that my review of the episode has been up, people have also told me about another thing regarding the ladybug, and how it's part of an Asian tradition which symbolizes love between chosen people. The ladybug actually reflects Jack's relationship with Ashi, and how he'll eventually reunite with her in the afterlife, where time and space are irrelevant. I have to admit, that's actually a really good Easter egg. There's also this chant sung by a woman during the segment with a hidden meaning that I found myself, and I gotta say, it's pretty brilliant for what it's getting across. I'm not gonna spoil what the chant by the woman translates to, because it's one of those things you must find out for yourself. It's a lot more special that way. Basically, if you want more insight on my feelings towards the final scene, you can check it out in my video on it. I'll even leave a link to it in the description. Just don't leave a comment about how my voice doesn't sound right. I've gotten more than enough of those. Bad thing number 2, the romance between Jack and Ashi. Now, before you label me as one of those Tumblr fuckwads who got angry over how heterosexuality is poisonous, that's not why the romance is on this list. The reason as to why it's here is because it's simply not written well. I'm not gonna lie, this romance nearly ruins the entire season, with Gendy prioritizing it over actual plot development, and making it the driving force of the narrative for the last 3 episodes. Episode 8 is literally pointless filler, as it has nothing to do with any of the running themes of the story and exists just to push this relationship forward. The main problem with this romance is that the way that it's written, it just feels really rushed, and it contains a lot of really lame jokes. I could only think of one time they said a joke that was actually funny, and the other jokes aren't funny enough to sacrifice the focus on the plot. Really think about it. Instead of episode 8 just being dedicated to the forced romance, we could have gotten stuff that's actually important in the long run. The two could run into the Scotsman building up his army to fight Aku, or just something of substance. The romance also commits the crime of taking away all of the potential that Ashi had and turning her into a generic love interest. All of her other characteristics are never utilized again, and she even turns into a damsel in distress. Not to mention the build-up to that wedding was cheap as fuck, since we already knew what was going to happen, and knowing that if Ashi disappeared immediately, we would have gotten to see more important elements in the ending, such as Jack with his parents or his childhood friends. I just keep thinking back to episodes 1 through 7 and how well she was built up without having to rely on her relationship with Jack. A favorite example of mine comes from episode 5 that I actually ended up overlooking. Remember how the madmen running the facility mentioned that children are easily manipulated? That actually resonates with Ashi pretty strongly. She and her sisters were only given birth to be manipulated and driven into aimlessly hunting Jack. She hates being reminded of how she was played to be a fool and how he's using it as an excuse to manipulate the other children. And for her to be gloated so openly especially upsets and angers her, giving her the willpower to break free from her restraints and defeat him. That's a great insight on her character, and it gives her more growth and development than people would give her credit for. That's why I hate the romance so much, because it not only derails the plot near the end, but it dismisses all of the growth that Ashi went through in episodes 1 through 7. Not to mention that it's actually used as a means to transform her into a cheap Deus Ex Machina.
Darcy! I love you!
Still stupid. Good thing number 1. Episode 2. All of it. After giving it some thought, I've decided that episode 2 is my favorite episode of the season. There were plenty of things to like about season 5, but none of them quite match up to how brilliantly presented and how perfectly paced episode 2 is. It starts with some good comedy as we get a glimpse into Aku's new state of mind and how he's developed a lack of motivation, even getting an entire therapy session with himself over it. It's great to see that Aku is staying in tune with what people always loved about him. This sadistic tyrant with a humorous way of playing up his evil persona. It would have been really crappy if they changed his character entirely by making him simply brutal and edgy, while taking away his humorous charm because they thought it would fit better on Adult Swim. Thankfully, they don't go that route, and the new voice actor does a reasonably nice job of replacing Mako. It's a nice piece of comedy that reasonably sets the mood for the rest of the episode. We then get a calm setting of a wolf wandering around the forest until it comes across some tiger creatures and prepares to defend itself. Meanwhile, Jack is wandering around a cloudy field until he's ambushed by the sisters and the ultimate battle for his life begins. Everything about this episode was brilliantly executed. The pacing of the story is steady, the synchronizing of Jack and the wolf's struggle is well paralleled, the animation and art is really stunning, and the all-around tone is balanced to a T. Of all the episodes this season, this one is the most visually driven. There's barely any dialogue from Jack or Aku, and the sisters don't even say anything. As a matter of fact, the second half doesn't have a single spoken word. The actions speak for themselves, and the episode is much better for it. The dramatic run into the rain is so awesome, portraying Jack relaxing his senses to visualize the world around him. I still get goosebumps and chills watching it. The music is especially powerful in this one, capturing all the feelings of action, suspense, fear, despair, determination, and intimidation. The music has a great purpose, mixing flawlessly with the visuals, and with no dialogue throughout these scenes, the episode allows the audience to better appreciate the atmosphere. The build-up is intense, and it keeps you at the edge of your seat. That scene with the green glowing tomb is so mesmerizingly haunting. As the music builds up, so does the mood, and we see what Jack is going through. In all of his years of fighting Aku, he's never been so vulnerable and afraid. He could actually end up dying in here, and the scene plays out in a way that really sucks you into his sense of hopelessness and fear. The sisters themselves are also pretty menacing in this episode. It really shows how they function as a cell, cooperating and overwhelming Jack, turning him to take desperate measures. This is also the first time we see Jack struggling with his inner self. We see how this 50-year battle has truly had a toll on his psyche, how Jack is firmly and calmly, but nonetheless struggling to keep himself together. It's actually really fascinating to see Jack talking to himself in two very different tones, adding to the detail of his deteriorating mind. And as the episode gets closer and closer to the end, it finally leads up to a shocking revelation for Jack.
They're just nuts and bolts. Just nuts and bolts.
This episode is absolutely perfect in every way. The pacing, the action, the tone, the music, the visuals, the themes. It is by far the greatest that Samurai Jack has ever been in years. Bad thing number one, the Guardian is fucking gone. This is another thing that I went into full detail on in my review of the episode in question, but to put it simply, this was beyond a shitty cop-out. The decision to get rid of this iconic character backfired so immensely that even the most loyal of Samurai Jack fans cried out in outrage. People were waiting for this character to come back and play a role in Jack returning home, and it would have made sense from a narrative standpoint. Jack was prophesized to eventually prove himself to the Guardian and gain the right to use the portal. Even the Guardian himself said so. The Guardian himself was also an interesting character, a simple force of nature fulfilling his role. It would have fit into the story just fine, but instead Gendy decided to give all of that up and give us the middle finger. To say that Gendy dropped the ball with this one is to give him a compliment that he clearly doesn't deserve. Gendy grabbed the ball out of the arms of a dying child and threw it over a fucking cliff into the mouth of an erupting volcano. This was the moment that everyone was waiting for, the return of one of the hugest plot points of the original 4 seasons. But nope, can't risk breaking our attention on developing this shitty unneeded romance. We must show off our glorified fanfiction. I mean, forget not bringing the Guardian back, his death happened off-screen, and we don't even get an explanation as to what happened. And not to mention, it was made out to be part of a ratings trap, since the episode promo showed nothing but the Guardian's land. So it was deliberately misleading us as to what it would be about. I could go on and on as to why this was such a monumental fuck-up that potentially ruined Season 5 and all of the weight of the build-up it was going for. But I already did that in a previous review, and I'd like to avoid repeating myself. Well, those were the top 5 good and bad things about Season 5. Regardless of what bad stuff occurred, it was still an amazing season with some very standout writing, even some of the best in the franchise. The conclusion left a lot to be desired, but getting the chance to provide closure for Jack's story at all was a satisfying gift to anyone who grew up watching this series, or even ended up coming across it on their own in later years. This will actually be my last Samurai Jack video for a long while, since I've got too much on my plate to do a retrospective of the season or even look back on the original 4 seasons. So if you sub to my channel specifically to listen to me talking about Samurai Jack, I apologize as my attention will be directed to other things. Either way, take care of yourselves and have a great day. MisAnthro Pony, over and out.